The helicopter touched down on the ice with a shudder that rattled my teeth. Robert cut the engine, and the rotor blades slowed above us, their rhythmic thumping fading into the howl of Antarctic wind. Through the frosted window, I got my first look at what would be my home for the next 6 weeks. Emergency Shelter Station Bravo 7, a squat, red metal structure barely visible against the endless white landscape. "This is it," Robert shouted over the dying engine noise. "Not much to look at, but it'll keep you alive." I nodded, my stomach tight with a mix of anticipation and dread. The isolation I'd signed up for was about to become very real. Robert helped me unload the supplies, boxes of equipment, scientific instruments, and enough rations to last through my stay. His movements were quick and efficient, like a man who'd done this drop-off dozens of times before and wasn't keen on lingering. "Weather's looking dicey," he said, glancing up at the gray sky. "Need to get back before it turns." He handed me a final crate of supplies. "Next pickup won't be for 6 weeks. Mark it on your calendar, April 2nd. I'll be here at 0800, weather permitting." 6 weeks, I repeated, the words feeling hollow in my mouth. "You got the access code?" Robert asked, already backing toward the helicopter. I patted my breast pocket. "Got it right here." "Good luck, Campbell." He gave me a curt nod. "Try not to go crazy down here all by yourself." I forced a smile. "I'll do my best." Within minutes, Robert was back in the pilot's seat. The rotors spun up again, kicking snow into a blinding cloud around me. I shielded my eyes and watched as the helicopter lifted off, growing smaller against the vast gray sky until it was just a dark speck, and then nothing at all. The silence hit me like a physical force. No people, no machines, just the low moan of wind across the ice and the sound of my own breathing inside my hood. I was completely alone. I turned back to the shelter, my shelter now, and trudged toward it, dragging the sled with my personal gear. The wind cut through my layers like they were made of tissue paper, and my fingers went numb despite my heavy gloves. I punched the access code into the keypad beside the door, my movements clumsy from cold. The door swung open with a metallic groan, and I hauled my gear inside, closing the door behind me with a solid thunk. The interior was basic but functional, just as I'd been briefed. A small living area with a desk, chair, and cot, a tiny kitchen space with minimal appliances. Monitoring equipment lined one wall, their screens currently dark. The air smelled stale and faintly metallic. I shed my outer layers, hanging them on hooks by the door, and took a proper look around. The space was clean, at least. My predecessor had left the place in good order. On the desk sat a white envelope with my name written on it in neat block letters. I picked it up, tore it open, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "To Chase Campbell, Station Overseer," it read at the top. I scanned down to the signature at the bottom. Frederick Calhoun, previous Station Overseer. Between the greeting and signature was a numbered list of 5 rules. 1. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. 2. Never use the emergency phone. 3. Lock the door every night. 4. Ignore any woman you might see around the shelter. 5. Never eat food already in the shelter, only the rations I've left. I read the list twice, then let out a short laugh that sounded too loud in the quiet room. Great. My predecessor had clearly spent too much time alone with his thoughts. "Thanks for the tips, Frederick," I muttered, tossing the note back onto the desk. I'd been warned about this. How isolation could play tricks on the mind. 6 weeks alone in Antarctica was enough to make anyone a little paranoid. Still, the specificity of the rules was odd, especially the 4th one. A woman? Out here? I shook my head and got to work unpacking. The company had sent me with specific tasks: monitoring equipment, data collection, station maintenance, and I wanted to get organized before settling in. The rations Frederick mentioned were stacked neatly in a storage cabinet. Freeze-dried meals, protein bars, and vacuum-sealed packages. Enough to last the full 6 weeks with some to spare. I checked the existing food supplies out of curiosity and found only a few canned goods and some dry staples. Nothing that looked particularly suspicious or worth avoiding. After unpacking, I tested the radio equipment, making sure I could send out after unpacking. I tested the radio equipment, making sure I could send out my scheduled check-ins. The system powered up with a low hum, and I logged my arrival according to protocol. The connection was clear enough, though the slight delay in transmission reminded me just how far I was from civilization. I spent the rest of the afternoon familiarizing myself with the shelter's systems. The generator, water recycler, heating controls, and monitoring equipment. Everything was in working order, which wasn't surprising. These stations were designed to function in the harshest conditions on Earth with minimal maintenance. As evening approached, the light outside the small windows faded from gray to a deeper darkness. I heated up one of the ration packs for dinner, beef stew according to the label, though it tasted more like salted cardboard with mushy vegetables. I ate at the desk, Frederick's note still sitting where I'd tossed it. I picked it up again, running my thumb over the crisp paper. The handwriting was steady and precise, not the scrawl of someone losing their grip on reality. That made the content all the more puzzling. Lock the door every night, I read aloud. Rule number 3. The door had an internal deadbolt, a heavy-duty one that seemed excessive for a station in the middle of nowhere. Who exactly was it keeping out? Penguins? I smiled at my own joke, but it felt hollow in the quiet room. I glanced at my watch. 9:30. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the corners of the shelter with an almost human quality that made the back of my neck prickle. This is ridiculous, I said to the empty room. But as I got ready for bed, Frederick's note kept drawing my attention. The rules were absurd, paranoid even, yet they were specific enough to make me wonder what had prompted them. I brushed my teeth, changed into thermal sleepwear, and turned off the main lights, leaving just a small lamp by the bed. The darkness outside the windows was absolute now, a blackness so complete it seemed solid. I stood by the door for a long moment, feeling foolish. "Fine, Frederick," I muttered. "You win round 1. I slid the deadbolt into place with a solid click that echoed in the quiet shelter. The sound was oddly comforting, though I'd never admit that to anyone. As I lay in bed, listening to the wind and the occasional creak of the shelter adjusting to the cold, I told myself I'd locked the door out of habit, not because of some cryptic note. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. 6 weeks suddenly felt like a very long time. I woke up on the 3rd day to the sound of wind howling outside the shelter. The storm had picked up overnight, turning what had been a light snowfall into a full-blown blizzard. I pulled my thermal blanket tighter around my shoulders and checked the time. Just past 6 in the morning. Too early to start the day, but too late to fall back asleep. I lay there listening to the storm. The shelter creaked and groaned as gusts battered the exterior, but the construction held firm. These places were built to withstand the worst Antarctica could throw at them. That's when I heard it. A voice, barely audible above the wind. I sat up, straining to hear. It came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice calling from outside. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, help me." I froze. That couldn't be right. There wasn't supposed to be anyone within 50 miles of this place. "Hello? I know someone's in there. Please, I'm freezing out here." The voice sounded desperate, frightened. I got up and pulled on my thermal pants and shirt, then moved to the window. The visibility outside was near zero, just swirling white against the dark morning sky. Chase Campbell, please, I know you're in there." My heart jumped. She knew my name. How did she know my name? I moved to the door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt I'd locked the night before. Someone was out there in that killing cold. Someone who needed help. My fingers touched the cold metal of the lock, and I nearly slid it open when Frederick Calhoun's note flashed in my mind. Rule 1. Never leave shelter regardless of what you see outside. I pulled my hand back like the metal had burned me. "Chase, please, I don't have much time." The woman's voice cracked with what sounded like tears. I pressed my ear to the door. "Who are you?" I called out. "How do you know my name?" The only answer was the howling wind. I waited, listening for several minutes, but the voice didn't return. Eventually, I went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. The next few days passed without incident. I kept myself busy with daily checks of the monitoring equipment, logged weather patterns, and maintained the shelter systems. The blizzard cleared on day 5, revealing the endless white landscape that surrounded me on all sides. On the 7th day, as I was heating up one of Calhoun's freeze-dried meals for lunch, a shrill ring cut through the shelter. I jumped, nearly dropping my food packet. The emergency phone mounted on the wall was ringing. Its red light blinked in rhythm with each ring. I set my meal down and walked over to it. The phone wasn't supposed to ring. It was for outgoing emergency calls only. At least that's what Robert had told me during orientation. I reached for the handset, then stopped. Rule 2. Never use the emergency phone. The ringing continued, insistent. 5 rings. 10. 15. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself. What if it's Robert with important information? My hand hovered over the receiver. What harm could come from just answering? The phone kept ringing as I stood there, frozen in indecision. Finally, I backed away, returning to my meal prep. The ringing stopped about 5 minutes later. I had just sat down to eat when it started again. This time I ignored it, forcing myself to focus on my bland pasta as the phone rang and rang. It eventually stopped, only to start again 20 minutes later. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. Each time, the interval between calls grew shorter. By evening, the phone would ring, stop for 5 minutes, then start again. I tried to distract myself with maintenance tasks, checking the water recycler, testing the backup generator, recalibrating the weather instruments, anything to keep my mind off that incessant ringing. It's just a malfunction, I told myself as I tightened a loose connection on the heating system. The cold does strange things to electronics. But as night fell and the ringing continued, I wasn't so sure anymore. On day 10, I spotted her. I was at the main window, recording visibility readings in my log, when movement caught my eye. About 50 yards from the shelter, a figure stood in the snow. A woman, Asian, with long black hair whipping around her face in the wind. She wore a white coat that nearly blended with the snow. She looked directly at me, raised her hand, and waved. My breath caught. I blinked hard, certain she would disappear, a hallucination brought on by isolation. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there. She pointed toward the door of the shelter, her gesture unmistakable. Come out. Rule 4. Ignore any woman you might see around shelter. I forced myself to look away, turning my back to the window. My hands shook as I wrote in my log. Day 10. Full visibility, no anomalies to report. The lie felt strange on the page, but what was I supposed to write? That I was seeing people who couldn't possibly be there? I busied myself with inventory checks for the rest of the day, keeping away from the windows. The emergency phone rang twice more, but I'd gotten better at tuning it out. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. The shelter had grown to feel almost comfortable over the past 10 days, a known quantity in this hostile environment. Until I heard the footsteps. Soft at first, barely perceptible. The sound of someone walking slowly through the snow, circling the shelter. Around and around they went, unhurried, deliberate. I sat up, holding my breath to listen. The footsteps stopped directly outside my window, then moved to the door. Knock, 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 gentle, almost polite. Not the desperate pounding I might expect from someone truly stranded in the cold. Go away, I whispered, though not loud enough to be heard through the door. Knock, knock, knock. I pulled my blanket up higher, covering my ears. It didn't help. The knocking continued, patient and persistent, for hours. Sometimes it would stop for a few minutes, giving me hope it was over, only to resume again. I didn't sleep at all that night. The woman appeared more frequently after that, sometimes at a distance watching the shelter, sometimes right at the windows, her face pressed against the glass, lips blue with cold. She never spoke aloud, but her mouth would move, forming words I couldn't make out. Her eyes would lock with mine, pleading, before I forced myself to look away. Rule 4 became my mantra. Ignore any woman you might see around shelter. Ignore any woman you might see around shelter. I started keeping a tally in my log. Day 11, 3 sightings. Day 12, 5 sightings. Day 13, 2 sightings, plus knocking for 3 hours after midnight. The emergency phone continued its irregular ringing. I unplugged it on day 12, but somehow it rang anyway. I checked the wiring and found nothing connected to it at all, yet still it rang. On the morning of day 14, I woke early after another restless night of footsteps and knocking. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, casting a pale glow across the snow. I made my way to the main window for my morning visibility check and stopped cold. There, on the outside of the glass, were handprints. Small, delicate handprints, pressed into the frost that had formed overnight. They hadn't been there the evening before. I was certain of it. I reached up and placed my hand against one of the prints from the inside. My hand was nearly twice the size. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. Until that moment, I'd been able to maintain some doubt, to tell myself that stress and isolation were playing tricks on my mind. But these handprints, these were real. Physical evidence that someone, or something, had been at my window while I slept. I backed away, my eyes fixed on those small, perfect prints slowly fading as the morning sun warmed the glass. I woke up to the phone ringing again. It had been going for what felt like hours, the harsh electronic trill cutting through my sleep like a drill. Day 20, according to my wall calendar where I'd been marking off the days with neat X's. 20 days down, 22 to go. I rolled over on my cot, pulling the pillow over my head. It didn't help. The ringing seemed to get louder, more insistent, like it knew I was trying to ignore it. "Shut up," I mumbled into my mattress. The phone kept ringing. I got up, my joints stiff from the cold that always crept in during the night despite the shelter's heating system. The floor was freezing against my bare feet as I walked to the emergency phone mounted on the wall. Its red light blinked in rhythm with each ring. I'd already tried unplugging it yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. Each time I'd yanked the cord from the wall, the ringing had actually gotten louder, as if the sound was coming from somewhere inside the walls themselves. I'd plugged it back in, hoping it would at least quiet down, but no luck. I stood in front of it now, watching the red light pulse. Rule number 2, never use the emergency phone. Frederick Calhoun's neat handwriting flashed in my mind. "Fine," I said to the empty room. "Keep ringing, see if I care." I turned away and headed to the tiny kitchen area to make coffee. As the water heated, I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The ringing stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing silence that was almost worse. Then I heard my own voice. "Visibility is down to about 20 feet, wind speed holding steady at 45 miles per hour." My eyes snapped open. I wasn't speaking, but that was definitely my voice coming from the direction of the phone. "Yes, Dr. Pearson. I've been recording all the data as requested," my voice continued. "The anomalous readings began 3 days ago, just as you predicted." I moved slowly toward the phone, my coffee forgotten. The receiver was still in its cradle, but I could hear both sides of the conversation clearly, as if on speakerphone. "Excellent work, Campbell," a woman's voice replied. "Continue monitoring the pattern shifts. I need those readings every 6 hours without fail." "Of course, Dr. Pearson. I'll call back at 1400 hours with the next set. See that you do." I stood frozen in place. I had never spoken to anyone named Pearl Pearson. I'd never had this conversation. Yet it was unmistakably my voice, my exact cadence, my slight tendency to rush words when reporting information. The conversation ended, and the shelter fell silent again. I backed away from the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't happening," I said out loud. The sound of my real voice helped ground me. "This is not happening." I went back to making coffee with shaking hands, spilling grounds on the counter. As I waited for it to brew, I opened one of Frederick's ration packs, a breakfast blend of freeze-dried eggs and something approximating bacon. I tore it open and dumped it into a bowl, adding the prescribed amount of water. The smell hit me immediately. Not the bland, vaguely chemical scent of reconstituted food, but the rich aroma of fresh, scrambled eggs with melted butter and chives. Real bacon, crispy and perfectly cooked. I looked down at my bowl. Instead of the pale yellow powder dissolving in water, there was a steaming plate of fresh eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and a slice of toast with jam. I blinked hard, then looked again. Still there, still steaming. My stomach growled loudly. I hadn't had real food in 20 days, just Frederick's rations. The smell was making my mouth water. Rule 5. Never eat food already in the shelter, only rations left by Calhoun. I picked up the plate and walked to the trash can. The eggs looked perfect, fluffy and light. The bacon had just the right amount of crispness. The toast was golden brown with strawberry jam spread to the edges. I dumped it all in the trash and went back to my ration pack. When I looked in the bowl again, the powder was there as expected, slowly absorbing the water. "Get it together, Campbell," I muttered to myself as I stirred the mixture. "You're just hungry." I ate the reconstituted eggs without tasting them, washing them down with black coffee. When I turned to rinse my bowl in the sink, I saw a basket of fresh fruit on the counter that hadn't been there before. Apples, oranges, and bananas arranged artfully, looking like they'd just been picked. I rubbed my eyes. The fruit remained. Over the next few hours, it got worse. Every time I turned my back or looked away, new food would appear. A pot of soup on the hot plate, steam rising from its surface. A loaf of bread on the desk, still warm enough that I could see heat waves above it. A plate of cookies by my bunk. The smells filled the small shelter, making it hard to think about anything else. My stomach cramped with hunger despite having just eaten. I found myself standing over the soup, spoon in hand, not remembering having picked it up. I dropped the spoon like it had burned me and backed away. I grabbed another ration pack, lunch this time, some kind of pasta, and prepared it mechanically, trying to ignore the feast that now covered nearly every surface of the shelter. Days passed this way. The phone conversations continued, sometimes with this Pearl Pearson, sometimes with other voices I didn't recognize. The food kept appearing, never spoiling, always fresh and hot and tempting. By day 28, I was existing on minimal sleep. The phone rang through the nights, and the voices outside had started too, calling my name, pleading for me to open the door. A particularly bad storm hit that day. The wind howled around the shelter, making the whole structure creak and groan. The visibility outside the windows was zero, just a wall of white. I was at my desk, trying to focus on logging the weather data when I heard it. A voice outside, barely audible above the wind. "Campbell. Chase Campbell. Do you copy?" I froze, pencil hovering above my logbook. "Chase, it's Raven. Raven Patel. We're here to evacuate you. The storm is getting worse." Raven Patel, my supervisor from the Alaska assignment 2 years ago. What would she be doing in Antarctica? Another voice joined in. "Chase, buddy, it's Alex. Alexander Taylor. Open up, man. We've got about 10 minutes before this weather grounds us for good." Alexander had been on the Alaska team too. We'd worked together for months, troubleshooting equipment issues in sub-zero temperatures. I moved to the window, trying to see through the whiteout. Nothing but swirling snow. "We know you're in there, Campbell." Raven's voice again, more urgent now. "Emergency evacuation protocol. You need to come out now." I pressed my hand against the cold glass. Rule 1. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. "Chase!" Alexander's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine fear. "The ice shelf is breaking up. We've got the helicopter waiting, but we can't stay long. Please, man." I backed away from the window, my heart racing. It sounded so real, so much like them. "Campbell, this is a direct order," Raven shouted, her voice taking on the commanding tone I remembered so well. "Open this door immediately, or you'll be reported for endangering the lives of a rescue team." I sat down on my bunk, hands pressed over my ears, but I could still hear them. "You selfish bastard." Alexander's voice had turned angry. "We came all this way for you. We're risking our lives. Chase, please." Now Raven sounded like she was crying. "Don't let us die out here." Their pleas turned to curses, then to screams that mingled with the howling wind. I curled up on my bunk, reciting Frederick's rules over and over like a mantra. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. Never use the emergency phone. Lock the door every night. Ignore any woman you might see around the shelter. Never eat food already in the shelter. Only rations left by Calhoun. The voices outside grew more desperate, more angry. They called me a murderer, a coward. They described in vivid detail how they were freezing to death just yards from safety. I covered my head with my blanket and kept reciting the rules until my throat was raw, trying to drown out their voices with my own. The smell of fresh bread and hot soup filled the shelter, making my empty stomach clench painfully. The phone rang and rang and rang. Outside, Raven and Alexander kept screaming my name, their voices growing weaker as the storm raged on. I woke to the smell of coffee. Good coffee. Not the instant stuff I'd been drinking for a month. The rich aroma filled the shelter, pulled me from a fitful sleep where I'd been running from something I couldn't see. My eyes opened slowly, then snapped wide. A woman sat at the radio desk, her back to me, long dark hair cascaded down a white coat. Her fingers moved over the equipment, adjusting dials with practiced precision. I didn't make a sound, didn't move. Maybe if I closed my eyes, she'd be gone when I opened them again. But when I looked, she was still there, and now she turned toward me. Her eyes were completely black, not just the iris, The entire eye, corner to corner, like polished obsidian. No whites at all. Her skin was pale as the ice outside, her lips blue-tinged. "Good morning, Chase," she said, her voice like grinding ice, like the sound of the glacier shifting beneath the shelter. "You've been following Frederick's rules so diligently." I sat up slowly, keeping the blanket around me. The cold air hit my face, but the rest of the shelter felt warmer than it had in days. "You're not real," I said. She smiled. Her teeth looked normal, human. That was almost worse than if they'd been pointed or strange. "I'm as real as this shelter, as real as Frederick Calhoun." "What do you want?" I asked, though I knew I was breaking Rule 4 just by acknowledging her. "To help you." She stood up from the desk chair and took a step toward me. I pressed back against the wall. "These rules aren't protecting you, Chase. They're keeping you prisoner." "That's not true." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Frederick Calhoun created these rules to trap future overseers, to keep you here with me." She took another step closer. "He wanted company for me." I shook my head. "That doesn't make any sense." "Doesn't it? Why would he warn you never to leave? Never to use the emergency phone that could call for help? Never to eat anything but what he left you?" Her head tilted, bird-like. "He trapped you here, just like he was trapped." The coffee smell grew stronger. I noticed a steaming mug on the desk where she'd been sitting. "I can give you warmth," she said, gesturing around the shelter. I realized the usual chill was gone. The place felt almost cozy. "I can give you rescue." She pointed to the emergency phone. "All you need to do is unlock the door." I looked at the heavy deadbolt I'd been sliding into place every night. "Just unlock it," she whispered, her voice suddenly right next to my ear, though she stood several feet away. "Just turn the lock and you can go home." I closed my eyes tight and began to recite the rules. Rule 1. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. "Chase, please." Rule 2. Never use the emergency phone. Her voice grew louder, angrier. "You're making a mistake." Rule 3. Lock the door every night. "They're lies, all of them." Rule 4. Ignore any woman you might see around the shelter. The grinding ice sound of her voice turned to screaming, high and inhuman. Rule 5. Never eat food already in the shelter, only rations left by Calhoun. When I finally opened my eyes, she was gone. The coffee mug was gone. The shelter was cold again. I got up, checked the door. Still locked. I made myself a cup of instant coffee and tried to steady my hands. The days blurred together after that. The woman appeared more frequently, sometimes outside the windows, sometimes sitting at the desk when I woke up. Each time I closed my eyes and recited the rules until she disappeared. On day 38, I opened my eyes to a transformed shelter. The bare metal walls were covered with photos. My parents on their 25th anniversary, my sister's college graduation, my childhood dog, pictures of our family home in Seattle with its blue shutters and the maple tree in the front yard that turned brilliant orange every fall. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The monitoring equipment had been replaced by a television playing home videos. Me at 10 years old, hitting my first home run while my dad cheered from the stands. "Chase, honey, can you hear me?" My mother's voice came through the radio, clear as if she were in the next room. "Mom?" The word escaped before I could stop myself. "Oh, thank God. Chase, we've been so worried. You need to call for help. Use the emergency phone, sweetheart. The doctors say they can help you." I looked at the red phone on the wall. Its light blinked steadily. "You've been hallucinating, Chase. The isolation, the cold, it's affected your mind. There are no rules. Frederick Calhoun doesn't exist." I swung my legs over the side of the cot and noticed the floor had changed. Instead of metal, it was now the warm hardwood of my childhood home. The smell hit me next. Pancakes with maple syrup, bacon, fresh coffee. The small kitchen counter was laden with food. Not just any food, my favorites. My mom's blueberry pancakes, the exact way she made them with the berries forming a smiley face. The bacon extra crispy, just how I liked it. A bowl of the sugary cereal my parents only let me have on birthdays. "Chase." I turned toward the voice and saw Connie standing by the door. Not the black-eyed woman who'd been haunting the shelter, but Connie Dunn, my ex-girlfriend. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the messy bun she always wore. She looked exactly as she had the last time I saw her, 2 years ago when she told me she couldn't do long distance anymore. "Connie, what are you doing here?" She smiled, that crooked smile that always made my stomach flip. "I made a mistake, Chase. I never should have let you go." She took a step toward me, and I caught her familiar scent, vanilla and something floral. "We can start over," she said. "I'm ready now. I'll go anywhere with you, even Antarctica." She laughed, the sound achingly familiar, though I'd prefer somewhere warmer for our next assignment. "This isn't real," I whispered. "It is. I'm here. Your family is trying to reach you." She pointed to the radio where my mother's voice still called my name. "Just step outside with me. Just for a minute. The helicopter is waiting." The emergency phone began to ring. On the radio, my mother's voice grew more desperate. "Chase, please, use the phone. We're losing you." Connie held out her hand. "Come with me, right now." I looked around at the chaos, the ringing phone, my mother's voice, the photos of my family, the smell of food making my stomach clench painfully. I walked to the center of the room and sat down on the floor. I pulled Frederick's note from my pocket, unfolded it carefully, and began to read. Rule 1. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. "Chase, don't do this," Connie pleaded, her voice breaking. Rule 2. Never use the emergency phone. My mother wailed through the radio. "You're killing yourself." Rule 3. Lock the door every night. The phone rang louder, almost deafening. Rule 4. Ignore any woman you might see around the shelter. Connie knelt in front of me, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, please." Rule 5. Never eat food already in the shelter, only rations left by Calhoun. I read the rules again and again, focusing on the neat handwriting, on Frederick's words. The chaos swirled around me. The ringing, the screaming, the pleading, the smells of home and comfort and everything I'd been missing. I kept reading, my voice growing stronger with each repetition, while everything I wanted most in the world begged me to break the rules just once. I counted down the final days like a prisoner marking time, 42 X's on my wall calendar. Each one earned through a night of locked doors, ignored voices, and rules repeated until my throat went raw. On the morning of day 42, I sat at the desk with my bags already packed, staring at the radio. My watch showed 7:30. Robert would be here in 30 minutes if the weather held. I'd barely slept, too afraid to miss the helicopter, too afraid something would try to stop me from leaving. I checked the door lock for the 5th time that morning. Still secure. The woman hadn't appeared since yesterday when I'd caught her standing motionless outside the main window for 3 hours straight, just watching, not speaking or moving. Her black eyes fixed on me while I packed. A low rumble cut through the morning silence. I jumped up, knocking over my chair, and rushed to the window. Through breaks in the morning clouds, a small dark shape grew larger. Robert's helicopter. I grabbed my duffel bag and the small case containing my personal items. Everything else stayed. The equipment, the monitoring systems, the desk where I'd spent countless hours reciting rules while the phone rang endlessly. The only evidence I'd been here was the empty ration containers in the trash and Frederick's note, which I kept folded in my breast pocket. The helicopter touched down on the ice about 50 yards from the shelter, kicking up a swirl of snow. I took one last look around, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The shelter looked exactly as it had when I arrived 6 weeks ago. Cold metal walls, basic furnishings, monitoring equipment humming on the wall. No sign of the horrors I'd endured. I unlocked the door, pushed it open against the wind, and dragged my gear outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow after weeks in the climate-controlled shelter. I pulled my hood tight and headed toward the waiting helicopter, not looking back. Robert sat in the cockpit, his face impassive behind his sunglasses. Next to him sat a younger man I didn't recognize. My replacement, I assumed. Carl Howard, according to my briefing materials. I tossed my bags into the storage compartment and climbed in, securing my harness with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Right on time," Robert shouted over the engine noise, giving me a brief nod. "This is Carl. He's taking over for you." Carl turned in his seat and gave me an enthusiastic wave, his face open and eager. "Hey man, how was it? Pretty intense being out here all alone, huh?" I forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. Something like that. As Robert lifted the helicopter off the ground, I couldn't help looking back at the shelter. My heart stopped. She stood in the open doorway, her white coat almost invisible against the snow, long black hair whipping in the wind. her completely black eyes fixed on me as we rose higher. "Jesus," I whispered, pressing my face against the window. "What's that?" Carl asked, turning to follow my gaze. The woman raised one hand in what looked like a farewell gesture. As we climbed higher, she became smaller until she was just a dark speck against the white landscape, and then nothing at all. "Nothing," I said, pulling back from the window. "Just taking one last look." Carl nodded eagerly. "I can't wait to get started. 6 weeks of peace and quiet sounds amazing after working at McMurdo. Too many people, you know." I looked at him, young, confident, completely unaware of what waited for him. I should tell him. I should warn him about the rules, about the woman, about the phone that never stopped ringing. "Any advice?" Carl asked, leaning toward me with an expectant smile. "Anything I should know?" Robert glanced over, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. For a moment, I thought I saw something in the set of his jaw. Knowledge, perhaps. Had he brought others here before me? Had he picked them up afterward, changed by what they'd experienced? "The generator sometimes makes a weird noise when it kicks on," I said instead. "Nothing to worry about." Carl looked disappointed by such mundane advice, but nodded. "Got it. Anything else?" I shook my head and turned back to the window. The shelter was long gone, lost in the vast white expanse of Antarctica. We flew in silence for a while, Carl occasionally asking questions about the equipment or the weather patterns. I answered mechanically, my mind still back in that metal box with its 5 rules. As we approached McMurdo Station, I made a decision. While Carl chatted with Robert about flight conditions, I pulled out a small notebook and pen from my pocket. I wrote quickly, the words flowing easily. "To the next station overseer, there are 6 rules you must follow to survive your time at Emergency Shelter Station Bravo 7. 1. Never leave the shelter regardless of what you see outside. 2. Never use the emergency phone. 3. Lock the door every night. 4. Ignore any woman you might see around the shelter. 5. Never eat food already in the shelter, only the rations left by the previous overseer. 6. Trust these warnings completely, regardless of how impossible they seem. Your predecessor, Chase Campbell." I folded the note and slipped it into an envelope from my notebook. On the front, I wrote, "To the next station overseer." Not Carl's name. He wouldn't last. This was for whoever came after him, whoever would take his place when he broke a rule. As we landed at McMurdo, I tucked the envelope deep in my duffel bag. I would find a way to get it back to the shelter, perhaps with Robert if he was making another supply run before Carl's rotation ended, or maybe through official channels, marked as essential documentation for the station. Carl bounded out of the helicopter, excited to begin his orientation before heading to the shelter tomorrow. I watched him go, knowing what waited for him. The cycle would continue. Someone would break the rules, and someone new would take their place. I hoped the next person would be strong enough to follow the rules that had kept me alive during those terrifying 6 weeks in Antarctica. Strong enough to resist the voices, the visions, the constant temptations. I touched Frederick's note in my pocket one last time, silently thanking him for saving my life, before following Carl toward the main building.